Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I am David Pendergrass. My wife and I were having a conversation earlier today about what's going on Hallmark and then someone's response. And I thought my wife, Elaine, would set it up and we'd just do some reflections today on what to say in these kind of situations.
Yes, I am a big Hallmark movie fan. I have a Hallmark Christmas watching blanket. I have a Hallmark Christmas movie watching blanket. I have Hallmark socks. I love to watch especially the holiday movies. Not all of them, but I enjoy it even with the corniness and the predictability. And I just recently heard and verified that the Hallmark movies for Christmas will have storylines that are more LGBTQ focused, with LGBTQ storylines and actors and things like that. And so I was quite disturbed by that. I was quite saddened by that. Hallmark movies have been known for being family friendly, and I can hear the critiques right now as I say that, so I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that I've always noticed about Hallmark movies is that very little alcohol is consumed. Until recently, there was never any alcohol consumed. In fact, nobody lives together in the same room, so there's no sexual activity that's shown or promoted. In fact, the culminating love story always ends with a kiss. It's usually interrupted, and then eventually they kiss, and it's not a passionate kiss. It's just very...
Well, sometimes no kiss. I mean, sometimes they just look at each other. One who was in Tennessee, the guy was a singer. I think they danced on the front porch.
And that was the end,
That was in the whole, yeah.
And so it's always been something that I could just leave on in the house and do housework or whatever it is, and my kids can be around, and I never have had to worry. Now they're at the age of 13 and 15. They can handle things, and we don't shield them from society by any means. We talk about things, but I feel like it's going to be corrupted by adding sinful things to the movies that don't need to be there at all. And so I was very saddened by that. So I expressed that to David. And I posted something about it and immediately had one, comment that agreed with me and another comment that said something different. And I even said, people have their right to their opinions. And of course, I have my right too, which is often poo-pooed on when it's against the progressive norm. So anyway, that was my question and my comment, I guess, to David. And I said, the part that I have difficulty with is that it upsets me that there's nothing sacred. And we talked about, of course, it's not sacred. Hallmark is not a Christian movie organization, production company, or whatever. I think Crown Media is their parent company. Mm-hmm. And yet it feels like everything's infringing on Judeo-Christian principles and ethics and morals and things like that these days. And everything's being bombarded, the news, the culture, the movies, the media, the TV shows, whatever, to be pro homosexual activity, pro, pretty much you name it, anti-Christian stuff, or pushing a certain agenda, and it's really disturbing. So even Hallmark is being affected.
Yeah, and it made you sad. So, okay, then the response, which of course we talked about, but then the response to Facebook, what's something that, because you said you want to talk about maybe things we can say in response. So
when I've had the conversation before with people, in fact, I work with a lot of Christians who do not share the same view that I do on homosexual marriage or homosexual relationships. I venture to say that if I said I don't agree with that behavior, it's against Christian teachings, it's against, in fact, the teachings of Jesus, things are brought up. And so one of the comments that I received today was that Jesus talks way more about divorce than he does about sexuality, about homosexual behavior, for example. And so when things come up like that, and especially when I'm talking to fellow Christians, I want to respond in a kind way. I also fully disagree on certain things that are said. I also see the things that are smuggled in. And so I want to be able to have an educated conversation with somebody, of course, loving. I mean, that's given. A loving conversation with people that are Christians or non-Christians about why I would disagree. But in particular with Christians, because we should be following the teachings of Jesus. And we can't pick and choose what we do and don't follow, whether we like it or not. I was reading Matthew 10 the other day, and David and I talked about this, and Jesus says he didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. And clearly, if you keep reading, it's not about a physical confrontation or violence or anything like that, but it's talking about division even between families for basically those who follow him and those who choose not to follow him. We saw this on several occasions in the last church where we worked, where there were families who would be good Christian families, we think, or good Christian people that seemed to follow the principles of Jesus. But when it came to the topic of same-sex marriage, they were completely against what Jesus taught and completely for same-sex marriage. And I always had such a struggle with that. But this is, I think, where Jesus speaks about this, those kinds of things, where if you have someone in your family, is what we saw, if you have someone in your family who is your cousin or your brother or your child or whatever, who is living a same-sex marriage or same-sex lifestyle, they would side with that person and say that that was okay, even though they would hear that Jesus said, man and woman are to be married and this sort of thing. And so it always bothered me. I thought you were going against the teachings of Jesus because you have someone that you love who disagrees or who chooses to live a different lifestyle. And that's hard. It's hard teaching. And at the same time, we have to make a decision. There are times when we must follow, all times we should follow Jesus rather than anybody else. But I see it so much in society, and even people that we know and love, that would just go against what Jesus said and agree with the lifestyle instead of go with what Jesus said and you go, you know what, I love my brother, sister, child, whatever it is. I love them deeply and they're invited in my home and I care for them and I will treat them no different, but I will not agree with what they're doing. And if it comes up in conversation, we're going to have a conversation about it, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so that really bothered me, but that in Matthew 10, it reminded me of that. So I fear that, and I have seen that this whole progressive movement and the whole LGBTQ movement has really pushed its way into the church. And we've certainly seen that in mainline denominations. But it's very disturbing to me that this comes up now. And then even Christians that I know are going to have these conversations or they're adamantly going to be for same-sex marriage. And I'm not, simply because of what Jesus taught, and the New Testament clearly speaks against it. And so the conversations that come up, the kinds of things people might say are, like my friend said, Jesus talked way more about divorce than he did about...
Well, if it's okay, first, I think it's good to break... not recap. I wouldn't break down one piece by piece. Okay. Because as we talked about earlier, I think it's a great example of what normal people face in these conversations and why people don't want to talk about it in the first place, because they get very nervous and scared and whatever. And as I've said on the podcast many times before, my first encouragement is understand that that's normal. You're going to have nerves and so forth. And listening to podcasts like this and discussing it ahead of time is usually the best way. You get prepared for it. And as you've heard me say many times about having those 30, 60-second talks about why you're Christian. If someone said, why are you Christian? Practice that. Practice it when you're not in the heat of the moment to say, why am I a Christian? Or if someone says, what's wrong with gay people? What's your response? And so it's just good to practice.
And that's where this conversation really came from, this podcast, because I said to David, I would love to have an elevator speech prepared, where I think I know what I want to say, and I think I know enough about what Jesus taught or what the New Testament says, but in the moment I do get nervous. And in the moment when people throw the Bible back, that's not comfortable to me, even though I think I can speak, intelligibly against that. Not against, it sounds combative, but I would love to have just a easy, I'm comfortable with because I've practiced, because it will come up over and over and over and over.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's, in my view, I don't know if there's a thing to say, but maybe multiple points of encouragement for both of us and those who are listening to. But one is, I try to say this all the time and try to live it, which is, of course, genuinely be open-minded that they might have a valid point. But let's go about, I think, one by one point. And the first thing is your first post, because I think this is such a good example of, like I said, what happens in the real world. Well, first off, you went into it thinking, I'm sad that this has changed for Hallmark because Hallmark has a very special place in your heart.
It does.
And it made you sad. And so you post on Facebook, and of course you even asked me, should I have done it? And I said, well, what do you expect out of it? And I mean, you probably wanted people to validate you, like, I'm sad too, or I'm there for you, and whatever, which just makes your sadness feel better. And if that's the case, which we've talked about, in general, Facebook is simply not the place to get validation. It's just, I mean, you can get it, but if a person does it for that reason, then it's unhealthy reasons. The first place we get validation is from within. God loves me. I'm valuable. I'm lovable. Secondly, maybe from a spouse. But you get those needs met on your own. And if you find yourself, you didn't do this. I'm just saying that's a good example of people who get.
That's maybe a portion of why I did it, but not fully.
But that's the real world where people sometimes post these kind of things for any view they have, politics, whatever. They want validation for their view, and we call that confirmation. It's a version of confirmation bias where yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm a little doubtful, but I already kind of believe it, and then your approval makes me feel better. Why people post selfies all the time or all the time. And that doesn't mean they can be proud of stuff. It just means, So it can be an indication. So anyway, so you posted it. I feel X, Y, Z. And I have an opinion and so forth.
And another part of the reason I posted it is because we are bombarded so much with this is right, this is right, this is right, this is right from a progressive side. And what I mean by that is pro-LGBTQ behavior and, pro-Black Lives Matter. And it's not, of course they do matter, but the movement, which there's some disagreements there. And whatever, pretty much you name it, it's up there. And people are constantly telling us what to believe. And as Christians, I feel like very few times, I mean, my brother does it, you do it sometimes, certain places do it that say, no, I have a different view, and my view is the view of Jesus. And so partly I wanted to say that because I don't want that to happen for Hallmark to go this way. And what can I do to help prevent it? Well, maybe I could ask other, that was part of my thinking too. Like, what could I do? What can I say?
Which is good, and I think the motivation, of course, is good. I always wonder I don't do that much on Facebook ever because I'm not sure how much is going to work. I don't think I'm people I can persuade, and I think individual conversations better and so forth. But
I did look up the people that I did look up the 1 million moms who boycotted, or there was an issue last year where there was a commercial with two females who got married on a commercial, and they kissed in the commercial. It was on Hallmark, and they fussed because of the family-friendly content, and it got removed, and then it was reinstated. So I looked to see, is there anything being done now? Focus on the family. A few Christian organizations before I even did anything. So
my first thing, which and you can join in. I know we've had some of this discussion already, but not for the podcast. My first thought is to pay real close attention to. Well, I'll be honest. This happens. Well, I'm always honest. But I mean, I'll nuance this. This is very typical of feeler types to do what I'm about to say. It's not typical of thinker types. It's just not as typical. Doesn't mean it can't happen. It's just more typical. Where when feeler types say, I feel something, when another feeler type, who are predominantly are females, like 80 to 85% in Myers-Briggs, when they hear something with which they disagree, or the implication of something with which they disagree, they will say, well, I feel blank blank. And the other person says, well, I feel blank blank, and I feel blank blank. And so they're ending up, it's like a pretend argument. It is a pretend / real argument on pretend undertow. It's a subliminal message of what you think you're saying, instead of explicitly stating what the belief is and then asking for opinions. Well, so the first thing that pops up when someone does that, which is what she did, my first thought was, this is precisely what you don't do. Thinker types don't do this. You don't say, I'm sad that Disney World is like blank now, and the thinker type, well, I feel blank. They just don't usually do that. They might say, they just don't do that. They would make a claim. They might say, Disney World's wrong for doing blank, or I think this, but they don't say, you don't have comments against someone's feelings. You have comments against thoughts or beliefs. And so the first thing is, if someone comments about that, is just to realize what's going on. That includes the person who likes to respond to people like that. So if you find yourself wanting to respond to someone saying, I feel like our world is so much worse off because Trump's there. Well, when the person said that, first off, they don't feel the world is, that's not the world is worse off because of Trump is not the name of a feeling. It means you think it's worse. Okay, but the people who feel compelled to respond, it says more about you that you feel compelled to respond than it does about the person who posted it. Really, let that sink in for a second. Well, I can't let them get away with that. Why not? I mean, that's where good therapists will help you. Why is it you think you can't let them? Why are you the police? Or the thought police? Or the bad thought police, or whatever. That doesn't mean you never should speak up. I didn't speak by implication. I'm saying it begs the question, what's your goal by speaking up, by doing that? And what I'm saying is, the first thing is, very often it seems to me, when I hear people do these pretend debates, they're really passing by each other because they're both really talking about how they feel about something. I'm sad about the world today. Well, I'm happy about the world today. Okay, well, the proper response when someone says they feel something is either nothing, or if you're going to respond, your response is okay. I mean, okay. Or it can be, I'm sorry you're feeling that way.
And what's that have to do with what I said, though?
Well, that's my point, is that when her response is not against the feelings, it has nothing to do with it at all. With
I
your
did
feeling.
say, I don't know what to do with this. So maybe she thought
maybe that's it. So all I'm saying is, and even it's not about that exact example, it's things like that happen all the time, which is to say, okay, I mean, people can have their feelings, and maybe they're sharing it because people have sad days. Well, I mean, imagine, this is like a version of someone will say, today was an awful day, and someone responded, my day was great.
Yeah, and they do that.
They do. Why would you even say, so anyway, that's an odd thing. So it doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. Of course you can. It's a bizarre thing. What bothers me is, or makes it unfortunate, I guess, in my opinion, is that when Christians do that, it can come across as just an unnecessary argument when there's no need to be an argument there. The second thing is that when there's an implied argument or message beneath it. Okay, that's what goes on there. So when she says, I think that we should just have discernment. I can't remember the exact quote now, but we should just have discernment, because you've already deleted it. We can't quote it. Right? What was the...
Right, I think watch it with a discerning heart or something like that.
With a discerning heart. Of course, the implication is that you can't, and you didn't say that, nor the people are. So of course we can. My response is, of course you have a discerning heart. I don't know what that means, but discernment, okay? And then, of course, to say the other thing, and then we start talking about Jesus, which is we should... No, it wasn't we should.
Remember that Jesus talked more about divorce than he did
I think when Jesus spoke about more about divorce than homosexual orientation, it's okay, or to...
Well, it was just kind of remember that, and it was implying that Hallmark movies have divorced people. Kind of like, why does that bother you? Why can you watch it with that and not with this?
And to that, I would say,
it was an implication, I think.
My response is, a few things. One, I would say, if I were in a conversation with a person, I would say, why did you just bring that up? Because on the surface, it's completely irrelevant to what I just said. Divorce, right? I'm not talking about divorce. I'm not talking about orientation. I'm talking about whether or not Jesus talked about that. So, and I really mean this. It is not accused, or I'm really asked the question, why did you just bring that up? Help me connect what I said with what you just said, because right now I can't understand the connection at all. And so I would give them a chance. So it's not. I'm not being mean. Maybe I missed something. Maybe maybe they're just not very articulate. Right. Maybe in their mind it was very connected. Well, good for you, but it wasn't for me yet. So try again, because I'm trying to understand. And maybe they have a phenomenal point I'm just missing, but I don't know what we're talking about. And if she goes, well, all I'm saying is, if she said, well, Hallmark has tons of things that we don't support, and yet what's the big deal? Why can we have discernment? My response to that would be, okay, I understand. So your point is we can have discernment. Hallmark movies has things that are not Christian, but yet we can still watch them. My response is, and I would say, so why'd you say that? Why did you say that in response to what I said? And if she says, well, in other words, it's still not related. If she says, well, it's because you said you're upset about the gay stuff, I'll say, right. Why did you respond that way? Because your response implies it can't be both. That is, I cannot be both sad that they're going to have an overt agenda to make homosexuality in all the movies and TV shows, and not support any other sin they support, and not have discernment. In other words, what I need more.
And
I just need more.
Divorce is very different. Divorce is
well, forget that. If you ever say right now, I'm trying to figure out the chain of argument,
right.
And I mean that in a technical sense.
But when you said sin, that made me wonder, like, doing this because it's. I don't want people to listen to this and hear divorce sin and then they go down a rabbit trail of that.
No, that's fine. No. I'm trying to. I hear you. I'm saying the conversation. I'm saying what's the connection they're trying to make? Because so far it's not connecting well. Right. It's logically not connecting well, and so the question is, well, help me understand what's going on and why did you say that and what. So that's unfortunate because right now, instead of having the conversation about the connections, so all I'm saying right now, if the point is,
and it was also before we judge kind of thing.
Yeah, before we judge and discern. So if the point is Hallmark has other things that are not Christian and yet we can watch them with discernment, my response is, of course that's true.
Sure.
Of course that's true.
Everything we watch, we should watch.
Everything we watch, we have discernment.
Absolutely.
This is not bifurcated. And I can be upset if there's an overt agenda of the homosexual lifestyle.
And a classic example would be, we used to watch The Bachelor years ago. Back when it first came out, we used to watch The Bachelor, Bachelorette, whatever. But then it became very sexualized. I mean, at first it was like if they kissed, it was a big deal, and then if they did the overnight suite, I don't watch it anymore.
Yeah.
For that, the reason is because it's so
After
sexualized.
After a season or two, it became nothing but
and it's not a Christian show, but I don't want to watch something that's promoting sexual behavior outside of marriage because that's not a Christian virtue. And so it's not healthy for me to watch that, or when I'm not around my kids if they walk in, that sort of thing. And so it's a similar example of a different thing. Of course, we're watching watch it in a discerning way, and
that's the point. So the first thing, and that's why it's hard to know what the point was. Mm-hmm. If the assumption is you can't do both, you can't be both discerning and not be happy something's being celebrated, that's nonsense. Of course I can do both. Of course I'm discerning. The second thing I'd say is, when it comes to Hallmark movies, we're not talking about in the plots here and there where things are non-Christian things are in the plot here and there. If they were celebrated, you would be just as upset if they celebrated divorce. Mm-hmm. If they celebrated, and we both believe, and I don't know if you've heard, but other people from our podcast on divorce, I think there are times it is the right thing to do.
Sure.
But it is not something we celebrate.
You don't have a divorce party, that
not
sort
at all.
of thing. Because,
and so if the whole plot of the Hallmark movie was they're so happy they finally got divorced because it's so good to get divorced, or if they celebrated abortion, if they celebrated sinning, if they celebrated gossip, if they celebrated being arrogant, they celebrated being greedy, they celebrated being prideful, on and on it goes. Well, then I'd be upset about it too. I mean, I know I would understand from your point of view, like, oh, that's a bummer because they used to not celebrate those things. You might have had it implied here and there, but only here and there. So the point is, that's like any kind of movie, any TV show, any music, any poem, any book. That is, if it's something celebrated, you can be upset about it. Some of you otherwise liked. At Disney World, have you had the same upsetness? Mm-hmm. Disney World might promote materialism and greed. It does at times when you go there. You have to make sure you're not, I don't buy all that stuff, honey, or I don't
really think. There was a recent Disney movie that had a lesbian cop. Remember that movie?
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't sexualized. They didn't show her having sex with somebody or whatever.
Right. It was not the point of the movie.
And that's the thing. And I think it's going to go that way, and that's what I don't like.
So anyway, so first is make the connection. Help me understand more, because before I give a response ever, I'm going to listen. So can you say more? Because I don't understand these connect. I don't understand the point you're making or why you even made a response at all to my feelings. The second point is help me understand more about the point you're making about the scripture. So if something in discernment, because it seems to me like these are bifurcated, I either or, and if that's true, then I completely disagree. I just want to make sure I understand your point first, and maybe you can convince me otherwise why I have to both love celebrating homosexuality and I can't practice discernment, or it has to be either or, rather. Mm-hmm. So those are the things. The other thing I'd say is when she talked about when Jesus spoke more about it. He spoke more about divorce orientation. My response is he absolutely spoke more about divorce. In fact, he spoke about divorce once. Homosexual orientation, 0. Mm-hmm. You're exactly right. He didn't speak about orientation. He did speak about sexuality. Sexuality is understood in marriage. And that's in the context of divorce. Because in Mark 10, Matthew 19 is the fullest treatment. Go to Matthew 19, 3 and following. Not to mention every other scripture verse in the entire New Testament that talks about it. But what's bothersome about that, of course, and this is well known when you have any kind of basic Bible class, is that Christians do not decide what is a moral prohibition or exhortation by counting up how many times it's spoken of by Jesus. For example, let me take that, make an argument ad absurdum. There's an argument to push to the absurdity of it. If I said, Jesus speaks more about divorce than he does nuclear holocaust, what's the conclusion? Nuclear holocaust isn't bad? It's not bad because he speaks about divorce more than nuclear holocaust? Is the conclusion, well, no. Is the conclusion it's not as bad as divorce because he speaks about divorce more often? Surely not. That seems to me patently dumb.
Well, it's also if you've broken one of these, you've broken all of these.
But I mean, right now we're talking about just, I agree. If you broke one, that's what, anyway. So my point now is we don't count and decide whether or not something's spoken of more. Mm-hmm. Jesus spoke about divorce more than he talked about killing gay people. So therefore, killing gay people is not that bad because he spoke about divorce more often. So it's a good thing to go kill gay people. That's the conclusion you understand the point.
Yeah, but that's ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. It's nonsense.
Yeah.
Of course you don't go kill people. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. You don't count how many times Jesus talked about something to decide whether it's morally prohibitive or it's encouraged. You don't do that. Mm-hmm. At least Christians, let me say it this way. Christians historically in Orthodoxy have never done that. Mm-hmm. What Christians historically have done, and basic Orthodoxy for the Christian church historically is, did Jesus actually teach about it? And two, can we draw an implication or conclusion or application based on what we know he did say? That's it. Did Jesus speak about sexuality? Yes, he did. Implicitly, at minimum, when he spoke about divorce, when he said, having not known from the beginning, God, the Creator, made him both male and female. And then he quotes Genesis, of course, that he made them, well, anyway, male and female. Jesus is very much for male and female in marriage. And So that's it. So we start with what we do know, and then we go to what we do not know based on the implication. So when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, it's hard to imagine nuclear holocaust as a way to love your neighbor or love your enemy, since he said love your enemy, both in Matthew 5 and Luke 6. So he said love your enemy, nuclear holocaust can't be there. He never talks about orientation, and that is completely irrelevant. Like I've said, never talks about nuclear holocaust. That's irrelevant. So we don't make decisions and moral judgments based on that. This always comes down to what it always does, and I've said it on a podcast 1,000 times, and I'll keep saying it. These ethical issues of which sexuality is a part always comes down to what it is your chief authority is. That's it. It's just going to be your chief authority. That's it. If your chief authority, like you said, alluded to earlier, if your chief authority is my feelings and not wanting to offend a family member, well, then that's what you'll do. But just own it. Just own it. Say, yeah, Jesus does talk about this, and I think Jesus is stupid, or I don't care, or it's irrelevant. But at least, if I were you, I'd at least own it. Now, what I would do is repent of your sin, because that's a horrible, horribly stupid mistake to make. But if you at least own it, intellectually be honest, to say, no, my niece is more important than Jesus, and her feelings are more, but that's what you're doing. Just own it. Just own it. And just understand you go against the teaching of Jesus when he says in Matthew 10, I have come to separate father against son, mother against daughter, or whatever. I have come to make sure they don't get along. And then after that he says, if you don't love me more than your family, you're not fit to be my disciple. And in Luke's version, he says, if you don't hate your mother and father compared to me. And David, who do you think? I am nobody. I didn't write that. Jesus did not ask my opinion. I'm in the same boat as everybody else. I'm in the same boat. That means I have to be willing to have my entire family cut me off because I see him as the chief authority and not the family name, family honor, my Aunt Sue, Uncle Gay Bob. They don't trump anything else. They don't. My authority is Jesus or is not Jesus. That's it. And
by saying by approving that behavior is not a more loving thing to do than just loving the person. It becomes, people make a decision, and their decision becomes, I can't love so-and-so anymore because that person is an active homosexual. And by that I mean orientation. That person has a sexual orientation where she's attracted to females or whatever.
Now I have to cut her off.
Yeah, that's very different too, whether she's practicing or not, whatever. It doesn't mean you go tell her every time you see her that she's wrong. Right, it doesn't mean you don't hug her when you see her, invite her over, phone calls, whatever. No, right. But it means you disagree with the behavior just as much as if I had and I do, we all do, that if I had family members who are gossips, and I don't approve of that gossiping behavior, and yet I still love them, I still care for them, and that's the difference. I think people think that if they don't approve of the behavior, this is where it's tricky for them. Mm-hmm. They don't approve of the behavior, and stamp of approval, you're good, do what you want, then I don't love you. And that's the
And I can't hang out with you on Christmas.
Yes.
And I'm no longer related. I've got to cut you off in the family.
Which is
in all fairness, though, there are families for whom that's true. They cut them off completely.
Yeah, and that's
my response is that's not Christian. No. I see no reason to Jesus. I just don't see any example in the New Testament where that happens.
If our children came home and said, Mom, Dad, I'm gay, I'm going to live a lifestyle of gay, whatever, we would not say, we'll never talk to you again, you're no longer a kindergarten. We would love them, and they would know that we don't approve of that behavior. If you choose not to follow that behavior, great. It doesn't mean we love you any less.
That's right. So you're accountable to God like I'm accountable to God.
It's tricky.
But I don't sit around and talk about I know people who are the gossips of other people. And, I mean, not to mention my own struggles, but I don't stop relating with them
No.
because I know they have a sin in their life. I mean,
try to
what in the
correct
world?
them all the time.
Yeah, I don't go around. I'm not their parent. I'm not the Lord Jesus. I'm not the Lord Jesus, and I'm not their boss.
And if they're not Christians, we don't have the
especially if they're not
same
Christian.
responsibility to correct the behavior. If
not
they
at all.
profess to be Christians, that's different. So there's so much there. And then the whole label of sin is just taken out of the whole equation too. That's another thing is, we don't call it that. So we can't put now homosexual behavior in the same lump as gossip, or if you say, God forbid you say murder or something like that, you can't even put it in the same lump, which is, again, really silly and dumb, and I don't like that at all. Which means it's never talked about in the church. And then if we don't have, if there's no sin, if that's not sin, and gossip's not sin, and nothing's sin except what this agenda chooses to call sin, which is, I would say maybe not wearing a mask these days would be probably they call sin if they use the word.
They would say intolerance, which just
yeah.
means disagreeing with them. But
intolerance, or treating racial inequality, things like that, they would call sin. But it's pick and choose whatever you want to label sin.
And what it does, in my view, and some would disagree, but based on many, many, many people who've put themselves in the category of progressive Christianity, Jesus ends up being a really, really, really good guy. In what we call an atonement theory, it's a moral exemplar. It's a shame he had to die, but he shows what happened. His death is just that's a bummer. But what really matters is he was a really good guy. We ought to be good people. Then why did he die? Well, because sometimes we make mistakes.
And if we don't have any sin, then there's no reason for Jesus to have died.
And they would say
there's no point.
That's
the
point. There is no. They would say that's the point. It was just a horrible. It's a sad tragedy. He was a really good guy. That is, it's not atoning.
And that puts him in the same category as Muhammad, any other person.
They might say, well, no, he was better. He was a really, really, really good guy. Yeah. He was a really good guy, and so that's good. And he taught us how to be good and loving people. Yeah, sometimes we make mistakes, not sins, or just mistakes like Bobos. And I had a whole podcast on mistake sins. I think in general that's nonsense and not biblical. Anyway, that's it. So Jesus, what he did is he's just a really good guy. And that's why it goes back. It always does an atonement theory. It's always subjective or objective. Subjective says he's a good guy. In theology, this is theology 101 class. If you study this stuff when it comes to atonement theology, he's just an example. Objective means he did something for us we could not do for ourselves. And the more you make, in the progressive Christianity, it's always the subjective. In my experience, I've never heard anybody who called himself progressive, or even sounds like it, who has any kind of objective sense of what Jesus has done for us. And that's because we're all good people, just some are better than others. And Jesus was the best. He was a really, really good guy. And so we're not sinners. And so why even repent? Why did Jesus? Well, because he showed us what a really, 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 really loving person is. And we're not always as loving as he could be. He's a good moral teacher. It's a fundamental distinction between that and what Orthodox Christianity historically has always said. It really is. And forget that for a second. If that bothers people, it means you're disagreeing with Jesus himself. Mm-hmm. Jesus did not think he's a good moral teacher. He didn't think that. Mm-hmm. He thought he was the origin of all moral commandments. He thought he had the authority to forgive sins. He thought that no one knows the Father but me. He really did think something. So either he was
my Father. Yeah.
You didn't read the Gospels, and so it's just. And then you're up against history. Yeah. That is, and you can do that. You can dismiss it. People dismiss things all the time, and you can take nuggets of truth. But I really do. I'm not being snotty. I really do mean that with people. And people say that, well, he also, but he didn't. When people start doing that, my question then is, what do you do with the historical claims of Jesus? I really mean that. So what do you do? Forget Paul. I had one woman tell me in Genesis, she didn't listen to Genesis. She didn't care about the creation stuff because she had a professor, someone came to the church and told them that Genesis came from different editors. Mm. It was about the homosexual stuff. And I said, I wasn't quoting it. I was quoting Jesus. And then she just, like she didn't know Jesus didn't say anything about it. But this is more example. Like, why? What do you do with those facts that Jesus said these things? And that's it. And so it really needs to stay about him and not about whether or not I'm a conservative or whether or not who cares?
Well, the only reason I mentioned the progressive thing is because it's a trend in progressive.
Oh, yeah. But people will always want to make that about you.
Right.
Oh, it's because, your view.
You're a conservative.
Right.
You're an evangelical.
As I've said many times, evangelical.
You're this, you're that.
And I have always told people, I would beg people, say, as much as possible, change the conversation back to Jesus and go, well, maybe, I honestly, not to be cheesy, but I don't care what my view is. I care what Jesus said. And what do you do with when Jesus said, from the beginning, God made male and female? What do you do with that?
Okay,
How do you interpret that?
Here's one that'll come up. The culture back then was different.
Mm-hmm.
The expectation was that men and women would get married and then they would have sex. They didn't have homosexual, people didn't approve of that back then. That didn't happen the same way it does now. And today we know we've progressed so much in this culture and are not that we can love anybody, and love is love. And that's, so Jesus didn't know when he was talking about them, he's going by what he knew, that they're male and female. So what do you say to that?
Well, those are good. It's a good question. Unfortunately, if I'm talking to a real person, and I've done this,
I think I know what you'll say.
I would say, unfortunately, everything you just said about the historical setting is incorrect. It's just mistaken. And this is where maybe if you don't trust me, and that's fine. I believe, especially if you don't know me well, I understand I'm just a dude to you. But whatever it's worth, this is one of my specialties. And I'd be happy to give you books if you like to go read from people also specialists. But Roman historians and New Testament historians who study Roman history, which I've done some, I've also learned from them, will tell you that's just demonstrably false. It's false. People in the ancient world, both Greeks and Romans, had a concept of orientation. They didn't use a Latin word for that, but they did have the concept. There's evidence for it. They did have the understanding of a lifelong monogamous relationship. They understood all those. They understood all of it. It was all over society. Nevertheless, Jews were in an environment like that where they said, nevertheless, homoerotic behavior is a sin. So I completely agree with you that the culture was different. If by that you mean Christian values and a Christian worldview is different. If you mean culture is different these days than it was back then, and as far as non-Christian, I absolutely disagree with you. There's nothing different now as normal pagans that were normal pagans back then. The difference in your practices, but some of those beliefs about sexuality are identical. Basically anything goes in the ancient world. You weren't really supposed to have sex with animals. It happens sometimes. You weren't supposed to have sex with people beyond your, above you in social status. But in general, it was a free-for-all, just like it is right now. Like people go to the bar and get laid and they go hook up the one-night stands. They all ancient world all the time. It didn't really matter what we would call bisexuality. They did all the time. Homosexuality, heterosexuality, all the time.
And oftentimes, my understanding is that the men would be together, the women would be together, and things like that would happen.
Very common. And if I'll stop there.
But the difference is, right, in Jewish culture, that was not approved of because in the Old
Testament,
very
bizarre.
They didn't.
There were Greek, there were Roman, and I think some Greek, but certainly Roman, some Latin philosophers who disagree with. They said they shouldn't do that. But what they really, really fussed about wasn't homoerotic behavior as such. But when men preferred to be what they call the passive agent, when they preferred to be the person who was penetrated, that's what they really fussed at, because that was really beneath them. You're like an animal. So if you preferred that, you're worse than people who don't prefer. So you can do it. Just be the dude who puts your penis in someone else's anus.
And that was Latin.
Be that guy. Those are primarily Roman authors. And Greeks did the same. Greeks did it all the time. Egyptians were a little different, but similar. Jews were quite odd in that as an entire people group, univocally, unanimously, 100% of the time, in every single piece of Jewish literature that we possess, condemned it. That is unique in the ancient world.
Condemn homosexual behavior.
Homosexual behavior.
And also sexual behavior outside of marriage.
Any sex outside of marriage. Animals, sex with animals, sex with your sister, your mom, your dad, with a cousin.
Sex with people you're not
married
with.
You're not married to, outside of affairs. If you were having sex outside of man and woman at marriage, it was considered an egregious sin.
So it's safe to say even today that sexuality is meant to be in a marriage between a man and a woman. That's Judeo-Christian teaching.
I would say it is today because Jesus taught that, back to authority.
Right.
For me, what I tell people like that is, well, you can have your view. My view is, and I say that because I've said in my podcast many times, I don't feel compelled to be everyone's police and quote unquote fix their view, because people can have different views. That's fine. And God will sort it out at the end. My view is that Jesus is my Lord. And I've said that Jesus is my Lord, which means he's my boss, which means I understand life as much as I understand it from him. I'm not doing that perfectly, but I really understand how Jesus saw the world and how we design life and how we're supposed to live it. In Jesus' view, sexuality is only in marriage. He said that explicitly that man and woman only get married. He didn't use the word only. He said man and woman. And the implied is. And when Jesus said that, he fitted perfectly in the ancient Jewish river that never stopped until about the 1960s to 70s. You started having some Jewish literature, and certainly Christians, by the way, the same thing. So, and I've said this before, but I'll keep saying it. Every single piece of literature ever composed, ever, in the history of Judaism and Christianity, until about the 1960s, always, when it talked about sexuality, condemned it.
Until the 60s.
Around then.
Talked
around
about sexuality.
Then.
Talked about homosexuality?
If it talked about sexuality, it became more of a free-for-all.
Okay.
But everybody who spoke about it, I don't know exactly what year it was, but it's not relative in the Western world that everybody. So every time I talk about sexuality, it's man and woman only. You don't have sex outside of marriage, not when you're dating, not whatever.
So the idea that the culture is no different than it was back then is not accurate. It's just that it's more approved now. It's more approved in society that you can have sex with whoever you want to.
Well, what's happened is, and I think I've said in the podcast, and this is worth repeating, what has happened, this is very important. It's funny, several years ago, this really hit me hard. For whatever reason, it really hit me. We failed to forget how much Christianity has influenced Western society. Now, there have been some really good books, particularly lately, that have come out that talk about this. There's a British scholar who's come out with one, and maybe we can talk about that as well, but there's some really good books that talk about the influence of Christianity on Western society. What happened was Western society has been so dominated, influenced by Christianity and dominated European culture and American culture, that we are very much still living on the vestiges of that, even though now we're becoming a de-Christianized Western world. Mm-hmm. When it's becoming de-Christianized and they say we are changing, we're evolving, we're adapting, we're progressing. The answer is no, we're not. We are devolving. We're going back to the way it used to be before Christianity influenced the culture, because it's always been pagan. There's always been pagans. So you might be progressing past it, but technically speaking, historically, forget what you're really, if you're a Satan worshiper, what I'm about to say is true. You're not evolving, you're devolving. That is you're going back in history before Christianity influence. You're going back to the Roman Empire before the Christianity took over. And that's what's happening. And that's what bothers Christians, especially Christians who think America is a Christian country. They are appalled by how pagan we've become. Well, you know my response. America is not a Christian country whatsoever. It's not. It is not a theocracy. It's never meant to be. But having said that, it is devolving to the way things are. This is what the world looks like when there's not a Christian influence. It's becoming more so in your TV shows, your movies, politics. It'll become more and more what it looks like. Europe, America is just right behind Europe. Europe is what it looks like right now. When you take away Christianity, it usually goes back to paganism.
So when people come and say, well, it's not about sexuality, it's not about sex, it's about loving relationships. Monogamous loving relationships are different than if you go out and have sex with whoever you want to. Male, female, whatever. That's very different to have a loving, monogamous, lifelong relationship. And you've seen that a lot in society where people are getting married to the same sex and they're having children and adopting children. It's praise and all of that. And so when people talk about family values or Hallmark being family friendly, I can hear the people on the LGBTQ plus side saying, well, of course you can have family friendly values. We still have family. We love our children. We do this just like you do, kind of thing. And so that I can see as an argument coming up, which I think I can agree. Of course you can have a family. You can show loving. You can teach them morals. You can do all of those things. And you're still living against the teaching of Jesus. And there's still, it's called homosexuality or sexual orientation for a reason. It's not without sex. And so I think by promoting that behavior that's outside of the sexual marriage of Jesus or outside of or whatever you want to call it, the marriage that Jesus proclaimed, which is male and female, then you're promoting something that's not what Jesus taught.
Yeah, I would say, And I would say two things when someone, they do, that's a common one. Well, it's different. It's different. You can have a monogamous relationship, love, and and that's like you said, the first thing you said, and that's different. My response is, what conclusion do you draw from that? And I listen. And if the conclusion they're drawing is, well, therefore that's okay, then my response is, okay, I understand. So you think it's okay if you can think of an alternate scenario, as long as you include some things like, it's monogamous, you have those adjectives, monogamous, loving, safe relationship, right? So if you add those adjectives, now it's different. And they're going to say, yeah. And I say, okay, I understand you. I absolutely disagree with you. For two reasons. One is because Christian morality doesn't work that way. We don't think of alternate scenarios, add new adjectives, and now it's moral. Mm-hmm. That's not how morality is decided. ever. Once again, morality is decided based on what Jesus taught, not on scenarios I can imagine. The second thing I'd say is, I can use every single adjective you just did to describe the relationship and take away adult and use adult and say sister or brother or mom or dad.
And that happened in the Roman Empire.
All over. The Egyptians did it all the time, and the Greeks and the Romans. And they go, oh, that's different. No, wait. I used every adjective you did. And if they say, well, okay, every adjective I did except it's got to be someone you're not your sibling. My response is, why not? Why is that? Okay? Why is that wrong? The point is, it's completely arbitrary. When you leave the moral teachings of Jesus, it becomes arbitrary. And becomes arbitrary, my question is, why? Why do you stop the buck there? And to stop there, that's the best analogy. People bring up a child. Well, children can't decide that. Well, they can if they're 17 years old. That's illegal. I didn't ask if it's illegal. That's just ethical. You tell me a 17-year-old and an 8-year-old can't think that much differently? Of course they think almost identical. It's a legal issue. That's it. Most cultures in the world marry children. Girls are 12 years old, 13 years old. Why is that? Because they think they're old enough to make decisions. And parents think they're okay to deal with. That's it. Where does it stop? What can I do with my dog? Use the same adjectives relationship with my horse. People do make that argument. They do make the argument. There are people who make the argument for pedophilia. They're the exact same adjectives. I will treat them well. I love them. I'll only have sex with them. Yeah, but he's 10. Yeah, but he loves me. He understands love. He's not an idiot. He's not an imbecile. He's 10-year-old. 10-year-old understand what love is. I'm committed. I'm going to take... So whatever it is, but a lot of times you bring up children and animals, people get so upset. And I'm not doing it to make them upset. All I'm saying is just use that and say sibling. The point is it's arbitrary. So those are my two things response. First off, what's your connection? If the conclusion is I'm repeating myself, well, therefore it's okay. My response, there's two things. One is that's not how Christian morality is decided. We don't make up scenarios by changing the adjectives and go, I can think of an imaginary scenario where then it makes it good. No, that's not how morality is. Jesus. Number two is I can use the exact same adjectives in a scenario where I bet you'll go, ugh. You should go, ugh.
And really, if you don't call it sin, then of course you wouldn't go, ugh. But if you call, any kind of sin, if you want to, if we do what Jesus said and call it sin, then you could do any kind of sin and say that. You could dress up gossip. Well, I'm just concerned. And you've heard people do this. I'm just concerned. I'd love for you to pray for so-and-so, whatever. You're still dressing up gossip and making it a sin. So that certainly happens. And again, I feel like I always need to make the distinction, and again, if you know a couple that is married, a gay couple that's married and has children, it doesn't mean that you can't be kind to them, love them, welcome them in your home, treat their children with respect, love. It doesn't. You should do all of those things, and you don't agree with the behavior. So there's a difference. And it's like it doesn't mean you have to correct them all the time, whatever. But if they're proclaiming Christians and they're living a lifestyle that's against the teaching of Jesus in any way, then that's when the topic comes up. And that's what partly bothers me so much is when churches are dressing this up and making it okay, because we're acting just like the world and throwing a prayer in there, or throwing a little bit of a gospel that we like, or whatever it is, throwing it in there and calling it church. And Jesus, I think, would be appalled to come in and say, "Oh my Lord, look what you're doing."
If we can trust the Gospels at all, he would be he is overwhelmingly appalled. Not what he is. If the Gospels represent what he actually taught, he is appalled. He is.
And I cannot wrap my mind around, still, after knowing lots of people who disagree with me on this and who I think are Christians who love Jesus and generally act like it, because we all, with the failure. I still cannot wrap my mind around why that is not labeled sin and other things are. And I think they would probably look at me and say, and I can't wrap my mind around why you're fixated on that and not on other things, but I'm not fixated on that. I just cannot understand why that's okay in their minds and other things are not. Why are we standing up against whatever it is? All the social justice stuff, which a lot of it we would agree with, and we'd say, yes, we need to stand up too. But first, we've got to decide whose side we're on. Jesus spoke about divorce more than he spoke about racism. Yeah. Why are they marching about those matters? What difference does it make? If you're counting it. Jesus spoke about that more than he spoke about social inequality. Anyway, I'm with you. I agree. And so people say you're being fixated, and yeah, that's right. It's okay. Your response is,
No, I'm not being fixated. I appreciate that. I know there are some Christians who do get fixated. I do understand that, and I think that's improper. I am not fixated. I am not at all the least bit homophobic.
No.
I have no chronic, severe, irrational fear of homosexuals. What we're talking about now is what is morally binding in the Christian life. That's all. That's all we're talking about. If you want to pick up a new sin, pick it up. And we can. Christians ought to talk a whole lot about materialism and being greedy in the Western world and how it's never enough, and how many Christians have multiple homes and mansions and on and on and on. Or people who are broke could talk about money all the time.
But the reason this comes up is because it's being pushed and pushed and
that's
pushed
why the subject
in society, and that's why.
Yeah.
And now even into my beloved Hallmark movies.
Yeah.
And that makes me sad.
And your beloved Hallmark movies. But yeah, Christians ought to be talking about all this stuff. That's right. And the grace that God offers and so forth. But you don't need grace for sexuality if none of it's a sin.
Right. Well, and clearly in certain places it's not. They're not talking about it. Yeah. Not that we need to talk about sin all the time, but we also shouldn't be living in sin all the time. If we are followers of Jesus, and I know you preach this, if we are followers of Jesus, we should be doing and saying the things that he did and said. Not maybe that we're healing or whatever, but we should be preaching the things that he preached about. Which was not all love, 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 like you hear from so many people. Right. It was also pick up your cross and follow me. If you don't pick up your cross and follow me, you're not a disciple. You love me more than you love other family members even. You give your life for me. You, whatever it is. I mean, read the New Testament.
Yeah, and I've asked people that before, and I'll wrap up on this. I've asked people before, like on this particular issue and other issues, instead of, remember, we don't ever have to be... If you can really sink in that we're not there to change their minds, that really takes the pressure off. If you're there instead to try to really listen, try to understand what they're saying, and if you can agree with anything, I've said many times on the podcast, agree with them. But if you do disagree, say, okay, but as much as possible, try to listen, try to understand, my goodness. So if a person says, well, I think this, and you might say, it's worth the question. So can you understand, is Jesus, and I'm really asking the question. I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from because I really want to hear. I really want to know. A lot of times I have to say those caveats and nuance it so much because you're so used to people just yelling at them or they're going to try to trick them or whatever. No, I'm really asking. Is Jesus your Lord? Like, have you submitted to him or not? Or is it something else? How would you describe your relationship with Jesus? How would you describe it? In your own words, what would you describe? And you listen. And then I go, well, maybe kind of, sort of, yeah, he's my friend, or yeah, he is. Like, oh, okay, well, he's my Lord too. So what does that mean for you that he's your Lord? I'm really curious. What is that? What's the implication by that? And you listen. And you really just listen. You're not looking for ways to agree or disagree. And if they have some view it means he's my buddy. Okay, whatever. Or I think when I say I think he's my Lord, which means I submit to him, which means whatever he says is right, whatever I think is wrong, if I disagree with him, because he's the boss. He's like a very, very loving, kind, commanding officer. He's never my buddy. He's never my friend. He's never my inferior. Whatever he says goes. That's my view. And I get that from verses like Mark 8:38 and following when, like you said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny his will, pick up his cross, follow me. I want to deny my will. So what do you do with verses like that if he's not your Lord? And I'm really, what do you do with those verses like that? And I've said the things like the Matthew 19 or the Mark 10 and about divorce and marriage and woman. What do you do with that? Because I'm not here to make sure they have something to do with it. I'm really curious. Maybe they've got some interpretation I've never heard or thought of. But in my experience thus far,
it's like a pie graph. I give almost everything, but I keep this little sliver.
Maybe in my experience, I don't mean this in mean. I mean it just. I really mean this as a kindness, the benefit of the doubt. In my experience, when I've said what I've just said, they have never thought about it. They don't even know it. They might not have read it. If they did, they've never thought about it. They've not. They have been for years being driven by. Sometimes you might say hiding behind, but to say in the positive, they've been driven by their notion that they are being loving, and surely loving is a good thing. Surely Jesus said that sometimes too. Therefore, whatever you say, Jesus, David, that comes out of your mouth, whatever your interpretation is, if it's not loving as I understand it, you must be wrong. Well, I understand that. What do you do with Jesus when he says that he comes into Galilee, Mark 1:14 and 15, telling people time's up, be believing, repent, and be repenting. And it's an active passive in the participle in the Greek. You can say repent and believe. What do you do with that? How do you do with the fact that he says demand and repent people? And then he's always telling people that they're, Anyway, that's all. Sometimes you not put it on like in a weighty sense, but you put it on to say, how do you imagine that? And so again, if the whole time I'm not trying to jump on them, you're not. You're just, oh, okay, well, all right. If they go, I don't never thought about it, I go, okay.
I almost feel like it's the opposite. If I speak against that view, I'm jumped on immediately.
Oh,
and that's
no,
what
that's
makes
typically
me
true.
nervous.
That's typically true.
And that's what makes me apprehensive.
Yeah.
So that's why I don't like to do it. And at the same time, it needs to be said.
Yeah.
As Christians, speaking to other Christians, it needs to be said.
And that's in those moments I know it just calls on us to have courage to say,
yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. I appreciate your opinion. Mine's very different. I think when Jesus said that, he really meant it. And historically, through the history of the church, they've interpreted it to mean he is the boss, which means I don't define sexuality and I don't change the adjectives. Well, David, what about blah, blah, blah? Well, that's a good question. But before we move on to that, what are your views about Jesus and Lordship? I mean, in other words, I'm with you. I don't have it all figured out. I don't even know always how to apply it all. But ground zero is either he's the authority or he's not. I mean, what else do we do with that? If he's not the authority, then what is he? I really mean that. Is he just a good moral teacher to you? Did he? And there are people going to say, yeah, that's all he is. Okay. We have very different views. I mean, no wonder we come to different conclusions on sexuality, because I don't think he's just a good dude. And if he is just a good dude, do you think he was wrong there? What do you do with that verse anyway? Was he deluded?
If he's a good dude, I don't want to follow him, because if that's all it is, then there's no. I mean,
they usually say, well, already like
all
love.
The good dudes and follow them. Great.
Yeah.
There are plenty of good people.
The Buddha talked about love. I mean, other people talk about love. I mean, okay. The humanist society can talk about love. And there's anti-religion. I mean,
and it's a free-for-all. Yeah,
do what you want. And you can be loving and talk about human flourishing.
And that's my concern.
Cool.
I get society's going to do its thing, and it's not Christian, whatever. When it creeps into the church or creeps into things that, like my Hallmark movies, let's not disturb that.
And it's very different.
Let's keep it family friendly.
The one place I get, and I will wrap up, the one place I ever stand up more as far as the sense of trying to change a view, from me, is in church leadership. But not other people's churches. I don't feel like right. But if they're in my church and they're in leadership, they're going to teach people. And that's because I'm convinced that, based on the New Testament, that what we teach matters. Jesus himself said, and every New Testament interpreter takes it this way, when he says, if you cause me the little ones to sin, it's better get a millstone around your neck and throw yourself in the sea. That's like, you better go commit suicide before you cause your little ones to sin. Yeah. And almost every New Testament interpreter agrees, by these little ones, he means his disciples. You do not cause a disciple to sin. Don't teach them something that leads them astray. That's a big deal, I'd say. I mean, in my view, that's called big deal, which means teaching is a big deal. So if someone's in my church and they're teaching something that I think leads them astray to go sin, we got to stand up and say, don't do that. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Now, maybe, and I've said this many times in podcasts, maybe I'm wrong, but my conscience says I'm right, and I've got to follow that. Because at Judgment Day, he's going to hold me accountable based on what I thought was true. Yeah. Secondly, I'm doing it out of good motivation. I'm not doing it because it's got to be David's way. I don't care what my way is. I'm based on the teaching of Jesus. He says this, and so therefore I've got to be faithful. Because why? We're back to that again. He's my authority. He's my Lord, and that's it. And well, David, you're just dead wrong. Okay, but I'm convinced I'm right because of what he actually said in the text. So unless you're going to tell me a different interpretation that convinces me otherwise, I've got to keep teaching this, which means, and that's the difference. That's the difference to me, is if you're teaching in the church when I can. But then doesn't mean every single time someone says anything ever. But if I'm in a church setting and I know that person's a teacher, I'm going to speak up and say, man, I really hope, let's keep talking about that. In that sense, I do hope you will change your mind because, or at least if I have the authority, I'll say you can't teach that here because I'm convinced that's mistaken. Other things you might teach, but that you can't. Well, Dave, does that mean I can't be what about their own lifestyle? Well, yeah, you might struggle with gossip, struggle with whatever. But if you're teaching people gossip is good.
Or embracing
then no, the answer is no. Yeah. I can't let you teach that. And I can't let you, because no, that can't be and I know you're a bigot, you're this, you're closed-minded. Well, okay. I mean, I don't like that you think that about me, but I'm okay with it.
But blessed are you when
blessed
you're
persecuted
for my
name's sake.
Yeah.
All right, Matthew 5. That's exactly right. Because that's it. So were the prophets before you. Right? Insulted all kinds of people on account of my name.
Yeah, I mean,
and so, okay, they're going to persecute me. They're going to, I mean, that's unfortunate. I have to have courage. Back to where my point was. You have to have courage to say, well, I just do disagree with that. And I mean, as loving as I can, we do disagree. And some people, that's very difficult when they don't like confrontation. But well, thank you, honey. Hope you enjoy your Hallmark movie.
I'll watch one tonight.
And
hope that it'll have a family-friendly storyline.
I hope 2 women and dudes just make out right in front of you. And you just freak out. That'd be kind of funny.
I can handle it. I just don't want it to be the norm.
I can handle it. I love you.
Love you.
Well, the conversation isn't finished. You can always reach out to me on social media. Are you on Facebook? I am too. At Glimpse of the Kingdom. Glimpse of the Kingdom on Facebook. Be sure to like it and you can see updates there. Also, if you're on Twitter, check me out at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, or at Glimpse the King, at Glimpse the King. And I try my best to respond to comments and questions on there as quickly as I can. If you want more, there are many more resources on the podcast and my blog. Go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, and you can see a full list of the podcast, and my blog is available for free. Are you active in a church right now? I'd be happy to come out to your church and do all kinds of classes and workshops there. Check out davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com for more information. And may God in His great grace give you even just a glimpse of His kingdom this week. See you next time.